Nuestro siguiente orador invitado ha retado los límites de lo que es posible. Ha surfeado en las olas más grandes registradas en el Mavericks Big Wave Invitational del 2010 y cruzó 7.500 kilómetros del Océano Atlántico solo, en una tabla sin motor, únicamente con un remo. Él nos viene a inspirar que con la actitud correcta, todo es posible.
He made his name paddling into and riding the biggest waves ever recorded in the Mavericks Big Wave Invitational in 2010, in a sport where size really matters. His inspirational story is the stuff of legend and has already become an award-winning film and a runaway best-selling book. He embodies the principle that with the right vision, attitude, focus, hard work, and self-belief, anything is possible. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and give a huge warm welcome to South African big wave surfer, SUP record breaker, and king of Stoke, Mr. Chris Bertish.
I would be giving this presentation in Spanish this evening, but unfortunately mi español is terrible. So this evening, I'd like to tell you an incredible story. And as I take you on this journey and tell you this amazing tale, I don't want you to think this is a story about me, because it's actually not. It's a story about the hero in every single one of us, and what happens when you have an incredible idea. You believe in yourself, you take daily steps and actions towards it, and you never give up. It's a story about grit, courage, passion, and purpose. A story about meticulous planning and preparation, about believing in yourself, putting everything on the line for what you believe in, and then going the distance, no matter what, no matter the odds stacked against you. A story about fighting for survival in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, through the fiercest of storms, the wildest of elements, the darkest of days, and the most terrifying, never-ending nights. Alone, standing up, unsupported and unassisted for over 93 days straight. A story so monumental that 99% of the world told me it was simply impossible. But it's not what I did that's so inspiring, it's why I did it that makes this story so powerful and so unique. You see, I believe that if you're driven by passion and powered by a purpose greater than yourself to be able to give back, lift other people up, make impact, it'll help you overcome any obstacle, any challenge, and even help you achieve the seemingly impossible. But it didn't all start here. It goes back to what most people know me for, which is what you see behind me, which is riding waves the size of 5-story buildings. And when you're in this environment, you learn very quickly that you've got to come prepared for anything. Because if you don't, you just don't come home at the end of the day. Good incentive for preparation. But what I learned about being in the ocean in this volatile, deadly environment is that you've got to become flexible and adaptable to your environment, and you've got to face your fears. Face your fears, embrace your fears, because it's beyond your fears, beyond your comfort zone. That's where the magic happens and where your greatest potential lies. And it was only in 2010 when I finally got invited to the Mavericks Big Wave Invitational, like the Super Bowl of big wave surfing, only 24 of the world's best invited. That I ended up traveling over last minute. My boards didn't arrive, my equipment didn't arrive. I ended up getting caught inside by the biggest set of the day in the first 5 minutes of the day, almost drowning. But ended up persevering through that and ended up winning against the best paid professional athletes on the biggest day in the history of big wave surfing. And what that taught me was that if you have that goal, to have that dream, and you take daily steps and actions towards it, and above all else, you never give up. When you face your fears, you transcend anything, and anything is really possible. And I realized that by facing my fears, I needed to transcend that and keep on evolving and changing, because the only constant in life, as we know at the moment, seeing everything happening around us, is change. So I took that philosophy and I tried to apply it to keep on evolving and changing and challenging myself. And I thought of doing the three things that terrified me the most, which was to write a book, make a film, and become a public speaker. Most people said that I wouldn't. Some people said that I couldn't, and many people told me it was impossible. I had no experience in film. I'd never got more than a C in my English test for writing, and public speaking was my greatest fear. But I worked on that project and making a film for about 4 years. The film came out, we won 5 international awards, even though I got turned down by every single publisher in the whole of South Africa, and the only publisher that would work with me told me that I had no story. I rewrote that story over 27 times until when I released it, it became #1 bestseller and runner-up of the Book of the Year in South Africa. And thank goodness I didn't listen to the biggest speaking agency in South Africa who told me I should never give up my day job. Unfortunately, I had already done that. But that's why I'm standing here today, because for the last 10 years, this is what I've been doing, is speaking to audiences all around the world, like yourself. That is not said to impress you. It's said to impress upon you that we all got to keep on pushing our own borders and boundaries, keep on pushing beyond our comfort zone. Don't focus on limiting your challenges, but keep on challenging your limits. But it was only when I got into the amazing sport of stand-up paddleboarding, standing with a single paddle, that I decided to try and keep on evolving, keep on innovating, keep on changing. And I started doing these long-distance open ocean journeys where I started going up the coast of South Africa. I did the 12-hour record, then a 12-hour Guinness World Record. And then I started realizing that if I used it for a purpose greater than myself, and I started attaching these charities to raise money to be able to give back, that's when the penny dropped. And then I started to do the long distance 24-hour records, and then I did the 350 kilometers solo unsupported up the wild, rugged coast of South Africa. I must admit, when I finished the journey, I was so sunburned and blistered on my face that most people couldn't recognize me, and they were very surprised that I finished. But what really struck me in that journey is I raised enough money to be able to pay for a whole lot of operations through Operation Smile, and pay to feed a whole lot of kids in Africa, and that's when the penny dropped. And I thought, if I could build a craft that was self-sufficient and I didn't have to rely on water, and I could get out of the sun and the elements, I could not only do 5% of an ocean journey, I could paddle across an entire ocean and change the lives of hundreds of thousands of kids in Africa. And most people thought that I was completely insane. Most people still do. But that's what I decided to do. I decided to do something that no one had ever done before, and I decided to take everything that I had learned and use all the innovation technology that I could to be able to make an immense social impact and change the lives of millions. And this is the journey that I looked at doing, which was across from Africa all the way across the Caribbean, over 7,000 kilometers from Morocco to the Caribbean. It was sort of in the shape of a smile, and that's why I was doing it for raising money for Operation Smile, so it seemed like a good fit. And just before I left to go and meet my little craft, which I've been building for about 3 or 4 years in the UK with an amazing team, I decided to take the last bit of money that I had, and I flew up to the northern part of South Africa where Operation Smile was doing their 10-year anniversary. And I never realized what an impact that day would have on me. And I remember standing there at the door of this hospital where some of the mothers that I spoke to that morning had spent 5 to 6 days walking, sleeping in bus shelters, doing whatever it would take to get their child to that operation that day because they have nothing. And when you see the emotion on a mother's face when they get their child back with their little face being put back together in a 45-minute operation that costs a couple of $100, it will blow your mind and it will mentally and emotionally charge you for life. And that day so inspired me that I knew that I would never stop. I would never give up and I would never give in until I got down the side. And there's an amazing little quote by a gentleman called Patanjali that tells you what happens when you get truly inspired by something, and it goes like this. When you are inspired by some incredible project, some extraordinary purpose, all your thoughts change everything that happens within you. All your limitations disappear, and you become a greater version of yourself than you can ever imagine yourself to be. And that's what happens when you get truly, truly inspired. And I left that journey, and I left to go meet my little craft in Morocco, and I was so focused, so inspired, that when I arrived there, I must admit, I was just happy to get my little craft onto the water. I almost had to marry one of the customs officials' daughters, buy a whole lot of camels, but when I finally got it onto the water, I was very, very, very excited because it had been 3 years in the making. As you can see, there was so much innovation and technology in this little craft. There was nothing like anything that had been built before, all powered by solar, and then I was going to have to paddle the entire way. The conditions that we had just before we left were so diabolical. The weather was changing all the time. That the area that I was hoping to leave from got hit by the most immense storms that they had seen in 50 years, and I couldn't leave. We ran out of money. My team had to fly home. I got an extension to my visa. My visa ran out. I got told that I need to leave within the next 3 days, otherwise I'd be put into jail. Not really the right conditions to leave out of. But when I finally left at 4 o'clock, 2 days later, my team had already flown home and I was alone. I left in the pitch black at 4 o'clock in the morning. And if you want to know anything about facing your fears, that was one of the most terrifying moments of my entire life. Taking that first stroke out into the black abyss. But I prepared and I'd done everything in my power to be ready for that day, and I had a backup of a backup of a backup. So what could possibly go wrong, right? Well, when I left, it felt like I'd won even just after I'd begun, because there's so much work and effort that had gone into this final day. But when I left out there, within the first 48 hours, everything you can imagine could possibly go wrong went wrong, and a whole lot more. My battery bank stopped charging, my solar stopped working, my instruments stopped working, and even when I was starting to take an hour or two break in the evening and I was paddling between 16 and 18 hours a day, I realized that there was a current taking me back onto land. So the only way I could eradicate that was to not really sleep. So I paddled between 20 and 22 hours a day for 3 days straight, and I got blisters through even my gloves and my hand. And once I figured out most of the challenges on my journey, within the first 5 days I'd sorted out solutions and innovations to all the little areas that were going wrong. I finally got very proud of myself that I'd managed to find solutions and move forward through this, and that's when I got hit by probably one of the biggest storms of my entire journey. And a lot of people ask me, what is it like out there on this tiny little craft, which is only 1 meter wide and only 12 inches above the water? Well, this is about 12 o'clock in the day. You can see the wave behind me is about 6 foot high. This is about 25 knots of wind. By the time I got to 11 o'clock that night, I'd been paddling for 15 hours. It was pitch black. The wind had increased to about 40 knots, which is 1 down from a current category 1 hurricane. I got hit by a wave that I didn't even see coming and knocked me completely overboard in the pitch black. Thank goodness I had my emergency tether attached to my craft, and I got dragged over the side of the craft. I pulled myself back on board, and I realized it was too dangerous to be out there in the middle of these terrifying conditions. So I got into my tiny little cabin and I locked myself in, but before I did that, I put out what's called a parachute anchor, which goes out the front of the craft, and I get dragged with conditions to stabilize me somewhat so I don't get rolled over during the night. And as I was trying to just survive until the morning and hopefully not get rolled upside down too many times during the night as I'm bracing inside my craft for what seems like forever. At about 1 o'clock in the morning, everything started to change and feel very, very strange, and I started to get pulled through the top of these giant waves. The waves had increased to 5 meters, and through my tiny little cabin I could see my craft's nose of the craft getting pulled through and down into and through these waves, which shouldn't really be happening. I took a look on my little instrument chart plotter, which told me something that shouldn't really be happening. Normally I'd get dragged with the conditions and with the sea state and with the wind, but my chart plotter, my little instruments were telling me that I was getting dragged forward through the conditions, into the conditions, which shouldn't be possible, which means that something was pulling me. I narrowed it down to the only thing that I could think it could possibly be, and there were only 2 things that I thought it could possibly be, and the only way I could rectify that was to get on the phone with a satellite phone to confirm with my weather routing agent what it could possibly be, because what I was thinking was so far-fetched that I needed someone to confirm it with me. About 5 minutes later, I got the most terrifying digital message across a satellite phone that I've ever got in my entire life, which confirmed exactly what I was thinking. The message read like this: Chris, you've either got a giant whale or a giant squid caught on your parachute anchor, which is trying to escape and go down into the ocean. I suggest you take immediate action and cut yourself off this creature before it drags you and the craft down with it. Like, I prepared for everything on my journey, but I hadn't really prepared to have a giant squid stuck in my parachute anchor that was trying to drag me and my craft down through the most terrifying conditions. I got into all my safety gear and I managed to unlock my cabin, get outside. I got my special knife that I have to be able to cut the line which would separate the parachute anchor so the creature could escape and wouldn't drag me down with it. And as I cut the line, I didn't realize how much load was on that line. And when I cut it, the craft spun sideways because the other line that goes to the back of the parachute anchor is attached to the stern of the craft, and pulled the craft suddenly sideways and rolled it. This is the middle of the storm at 2 o'clock in the morning in howling wind. I ended up getting thrown overboard, wrapped over the side of the craft as it was rolling in the middle of the night in the storm. Now I'm underneath the craft in the pitch black in the middle of the storm with this creature outside. I mean, if I could have trained it to pull me in the right direction, or maybe harvested for calamari, that would have been great, but unfortunately I wasn't able to do that, and I was just trying to get free. And as I cut the only line that was holding me underneath the water against the craft, I cut the line, and as I cut the line, I heard the line go zzzz, which was the line cutting through my finger, and I actually thought my finger had been ripped off. And as I came back up and I put my hands on the side of the craft, I remember looking down to see if my finger was still attached, and thank goodness it still was, but there was already blood coming out of my gloves. And I realized that I needed to just survive through the night, but at least I got the creature out of my parachute anchor and I could proceed forward. And for the next 4 hours, I was just trying to survive until daylight. And when I got through to daylight, I remember looking at my finger and realizing that I could nurse it back to health over a little bit of time if I just managed it correctly. And I went outside and I realized that my main steering system had been ripped off my deck of my craft by a giant wave in the night, and now I had no steering. And I thought that things couldn't really get any worse, and that's when I got pushed into the shipping lanes. And a lot of people always ask me, what is it like out there? Did I see any ships? Well, I think this is a really good example of, yes, I saw a whole lot of ships. If you see in the picture behind me on my right-hand side at the top, the little black item over there with a red ring around it is my little craft. And every single one of those little blue items are super tankers coming at me from every single direction, all within a 5-mile radius of me trying to run me flat. And if you think that's not terrifying, I think my soon-to-watch gives you a really good example of how terrifying it is, because it shows you that my resting heart rate was 59. When I was paddling, normally it was 107. And every single one of those 5 little spikes in green is a different super tanker through the night that I thought was going to run me flat, where my heart rate went up to over 208, which is 1 down from a full-blown cardiac arrest. So yes, it was reasonably stressful. I managed to get through the Canary Islands and get out into the middle of the Atlantic, and I was just happy to find solutions to most of the situations that were happening and unfolding around me. And I got through to Christmas Day, and mostly for most people sitting here today, Christmas Day is normally a really good day, where you're celebrating with your friends and family and you're eating roast duck or turkey or whatever it is. Unfortunately, that was not my day. I had a really bad day on Christmas. I was sitting in my tiny little craft, and I was absolutely I was just drained physically, mentally, and emotionally. I've been pushing it for the last 2 weeks straight, and my body was destroyed. And I remember picking up my same freeze-dried food packet, which was the same ingredients that I'd had for the last 25 days, every single day, the same freeze-dried food packet. And as I looked at it, I lost my appetite. And as I was getting upset with all the things that were going on, thinking of my friends and family that were having Christmas dinner back home, and thinking what a really stupid idea it was to paddle across the Atlantic Ocean, I realized that my craft was listing sideways and I had a leak and I was actually slowly sinking. And I caught myself getting really down and depressed about it, and I started getting really emotional. And I had to catch myself in that moment and think of how bad things were. Because yes, they were bad, but they could be worse. They could always be worse. And I started thinking of all the little kids that I was doing this for, and that they don't even have a face that's put together properly. And I started to think of having an attitude of gratitude for all the things we do have and we take for granted, and not focusing on the negative things. And in that moment I had a revelation, and I thought to myself, shut up, suck it up, get up, stand up, make the change, and be the change you want to see in the world today. Things can always be a whole lot worse, so focus on the positives. So I put my little Christmas hat on, I put a smile on my face, I put some old school In Excess music on, and I got out there and I just focused on just one stroke at a time, one session at a time, for as long as it takes, until I get there. And that day became a very pivotal moment for me and helped me really get through the next couple of weeks and the next month. And I really needed to have the right sort of attitude to be able to get through this kind of state and these kind of really big challenges. Because the next day, the next morning, I needed to have my A game on. Because I was making my water on my little water maker on my deck on my tiny little craft, and I was watching it going in drip by drip by drip. And that's when I saw it. This thing came up at such speed that everything went into slow motion. And when it hit the side of the craft, that's when I realized what it was. This thing hit me so hard that it knocked the side of my craft up, and I almost fell over into it. The head came out of the water, and I just saw this big black eye. It was a giant great white shark, and I just got knocked off balance, and I managed to pull myself back onto balance as this head went straight underneath the water, and it started swimming underneath my craft. And that's when I realized how wide it was and how long it was, and it started swimming away, and then it turned around about 50 meters away, and it turned around and came straight back at me like a Scud missile. And by the time it came back at me, it makes you realize how completely vulnerable and alone you are out there when you're thousands of miles from any other help or any other human, and you have this thing coming at you at speed. It's like a bus with teeth that will not stop. And it came straight back at me. I thought it was going to take a giant bite out of the side of my craft, and I had my deck knife out, and I was ready to go into battle. I still had no idea what I was going to do, but I was ready anyway. And as it got to about 2 feet in front of me, it splashed, made a big splash. I thought it was going to bite the side of the craft, and then it steered off, and it swam away. But it took me about 25 minutes to stop shaking from the fear, and to be able to put down that knife. And thank goodness, I'm not sure if it was because of my pirate looking beard at the time, but he never came back. And I was very fortunate, it really rattled me mentally just to be able to get through that, and because there was another experience that happened similarly about 24 hours later. But the next morning, thank goodness, when I woke up for my 4 o'clock shift, I was greeted by this guy, Mr. Wings, the flying fish, who had landed on the deck of my craft during the night, and Unfortunately for Mr. Wings, he was dead. But as you can see, he gave me an immense amount of joy. And during that really difficult and challenging time, I needed that upliftment as much as possible. Mr. Dink Wings, the flying fish, was obviously dead by the time I found him. But as you can see, he gave me huge amounts of joy. I put his little wings out. I made him fly around like an airplane for a while. Then I duct taped him onto my hat for a while. Then I stuffed him in my board shorts and paddled with him for a while. Then obviously at lunch, well, I got hungry, so I ate him. Oh, I don't know what you're worried about. It was the tastiest morsel that I'd had on the whole journey. But what it taught me was, in that moment, was you've got to celebrate the small things. Celebrate your small victories, because even if you have to fake it to make it, you've got to keep yourself positive no matter what you can do to be able to get through these difficult times. And a lot of people thought that I'd get lonely out there. I was out there by myself for months on end. But I never got lonely because there was so much that I needed to innovate and fix and find solutions to most of the time. And even though I was away from my family and friends, I created this own little ocean family. I saw dolphins, I saw whales, and then within the first couple of weeks, I bumped into this amazing little creature. I met him the first time when I dived underneath the craft to scrape all the barnacles off the craft, and I bumped into him. And I got a bit of a fight, and then the next week when I swam down underneath my craft again, I bumped into him again, and then he invited some of his friends. But the amazing thing about him is he became my greatest companion on my entire journey. So I'd like to welcome you to Mr. Stripe, the pinefish. Mr. Stripe became my greatest companion, and he ended up swimming across the entire Atlantic Ocean with me, even after the first great white shark, the second great white shark experience. And that's a definition of friendship that I'm really not able to describe in length to you, but he became an incredible companion on my journey. And it was only when I got to the last stage of my journey, I got caught in this massive storm for the last week that I was out there. The wind was in the 35 to 45 to 50 knot range. The sea state, as you can see behind me, was absolutely terrifying. Through the day, through the night. And I had to navigate with a single paddle to try and find an island which is 20 kilometers wide, over 7,500 kilometers across the ocean, like a pinpoint. And I knew that when the storm changed, I needed to navigate my way to be able to get to this location. And if I had missed it, the closest form of land was, well, it was Venezuela. And I didn't have a visa for Venezuela. I also didn't have enough food to be able to get me there. But as I got to this point of this journey, this is actually the first picture that was taken as I was coming in about 3 miles out of Antigua. And it was a super emotional experience for my brothers and my team that came out on the only craft that could come out in this wild conditions to see me coming in. But for me I was just super focused, because I didn't want the headlines to be, man almost crosses the Atlantic Ocean on stand-up paddleboard and get shipwrecked on the side of island. So I was super focused to just try and make it into the lee of the island to get into the protection of where I could finish this monumental journey. And as I came in there, this was actually the first picture that was taken, and it just was super emotional for everybody that was involved, because it was the first time anyone had actually seen what I'd been doing and what I'd been experiencing out there alone for over 93 days straight. And when I got into the lee of the island and I pulled that flag to signify the end of this incredible monumental journey, with framed around the background with the what's called the Pillars of Hercules, the cliffs behind me, I realized in that moment that I'd used my passion to be able to fulfill my purpose, and by doing that, I was able to change the lives of over hundreds of thousands of kids in Africa. And we raised enough money to be able to pay for over 1,000 operations and feed over 200,000 kids in Africa. And it was like the weight of those little kids stepping off my shoulders when I actually finished this journey. And Operation Smile put together a really nice little video that gives you an idea of how powerful this journey really was. So enjoy. about how we get through this. One stroke at a time. 1 minute at a time, 1 hour at a time, 1 day at a time, 1 month at a time. I always get a little bit emotional when I see that clip. It's very, very powerful. I learned some incredible lessons on this journey. And the most important one that I want to leave you with this evening, especially looking at the current environment that we've been facing for the last 18 months, is that every single one of us sitting here today, we all have our own storms to face. Our own oceans to cross in business and in life. And sometimes those goals, those challenges, that change seems too overwhelming, too big, sometimes even insurmountable. How do we achieve it? How do we get through it? How do we overcome it? 1 stroke at a time, 1 minute at a time, 1 hour at a time, for as long as it takes. And if we keep getting knocked down, we keep on getting up, we keep pushing forward, we keep moving forward. And if we stay focused, determined, we persevere, and above all else, we never give up. You'll overcome any obstacle, any challenge, any change, and you'll be able to achieve literally anything, even the seemingly impossible. Thank you very much.